me do a few tricks, some old and then some new tricks. I'm very versatile.
Greetings from Castle Goring, from Vicky, Aurora, and from me. Well, mwah. I need to be careful with Mickey because I think she has slightly hurt her leg again. She keeps on pulling a muscle, which is not a good thing. But without further ado, if Aurora will permit me, I will plunge right in with some humble pie, which I am going to have to eat, I'm afraid. Because David Ramsey Carr is but one of a few people who pointed out an error I made, and thank you very much for that. He says, "Dear Lady C, I am aghast." I think he's got his tongue firmly in his cheek, by the way. And I love humour, even if it's at my expense. You are normally so punctilious and precise with pronunciation. Whatever possessed you to sound the name at the time of writing of the Queen of Denmark as if it were a Spanish name? She is not Margarita, nor could she be readily mistaken for a mixture of Cointreau and tequila. However intoxicating is her personality. Surely a reasonable anglicization of the pronunciation of her name would be Margareta. Regards, David. I stand corrected, and I'll tell you exactly what happened. Before taping, I was speaking to somebody about Queen Margarita of the Bulgarians, and I then plunged right into taping, and I think that's how the error arose. Sorry. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. And if I may now take my hands out of the stocks, please. And I notice nobody threw rotten eggs. Are you saving them for someone else? That's the question. I'm going to plunge in with what PMQ says. Lady C, I can't wait to hear your comments on the disaster that the Golden Globe Awards were for Moneygun. Oh dear. Moneygun. Do we feel some sniffles coming on? Or are we just in sympathy with her? And Harry's, sorry, let me rephrase that. I can't wait to hear your comments on the disaster that the Golden Globe Awards were for Moneygun and Harry's continuing decline. Your thoughts would be much appreciated. Well, they certainly are appreciated in this quarter, because I feel I have a head cold coming on. Aurora, can you please, darling, run and get Marty some Coke, please? My throat is parched. Well, fun and joke aside, yes, I'm going to tell you a little secret that I've been told as well. But let me say first, I'll address the issue first. Well, Gina Torres cast some subtle but serious shade on Meghan when she informed the interviewer that there is a fantastic and insane amount of texting that's taking place with the group of actors, but they don't have Meghan's number, so she's not a part of the group. No. Do we believe that? Well, Let me put it this way. Isn't Abigail Spencer a friend of hers? And isn't Abigail Spencer also one of the ensemble players on Suits? There's that little aspect to consider. Then there's another aspect to consider. Ari Emanuel would have Meghan's number. So would, don't tell anybody, Ted Sarandos, or Sarandos, however he pronounces his name, who is the head of Netflix, which is the company that's having the revival of Suits as such a success. So how come Meghan is unobtainable? Well, I'll tell you how come Meghan isn't a part of the group. Because a friend of mine, who's also a friend of my children's, and is Canadian, and very chic and very glam and very beautiful, and knows everybody in Toronto, she told us some time ago that Meghan is loathed in Canada. And not only is she generally loathed, but she had a reputation that, shall we say, was singularly undesirable by the time she left Suits. She crowed and let everybody know how superior she was to them, because she was being bonked by a prince. And she was going to be a duchess. And, of course, there had been tensions before, because Meghan did not make herself popular on Suits. She didn't make herself popular with the cast, whether it was in front of the camera or behind the camera. The longer things went on and the more successful she became, was the more impossible she became. And this is what I was told, and I checked it out, and it turns out it was absolutely true. Well, is it any surprise that she's not a part of the group? No. Also, she's a bit long in the tooth to be playing a love interest now, isn't she? I mean, how credible would it be that this 40-something-year-old woman is an ingenue who is sleeping her way up the ladder, lizard-lapping Patrick J. Adams's character in the back room as she mounts the counter and mounts him. Not very convincing. Well, aside from that, there were some amazing jokes, because Joe Coy had two jokes about Meghan and Harry, and he also had a comment about the crown, that people in England have completely misinterpreted, because he wasn't saying anything pejorative about the royal family. He was saying something pejorative about the dictation of the royal family in the crown, which was an absolutely sound comment to make. Well, he said, just, and I'm quoting, just a great series about a rich, white, dysfunctional family, all scheming. Oh no, that's the crown. That's the crown, I'm sorry. Then, he said, how great was Imelda Staunton in The Crown? Wasn't she amazing? The portrayal of the Queen was so good, Prince Harry called her and asked her for money. Then he also said, turns out Harry and Meghan Markle will still get paid millions of dollars for doing absolutely nothing. And that's just by Netflix. And the camera immediately panned to Ted Sarandos, who gave a very gracious and embarrassed and sheepish smile, but a sort of covering all the bases as a good professional would. Well, there's even worse, because Harry has just been excluded from Sandhurst's Guide to the Most Notable Alumni, notwithstanding the fact that William wrote the foreword to the new book. Harry was left out of this book. They also served 200 people who trained at Sandhurst by Vaughan Kent Payne, who is both a distinguished veteran and an author. Now, when they leave out a prince of the blood who was in the army for 10 years, who has medals to show for his time there, who they were very proud of initially. Oh dear, oh dear. 2024 is certainly turning out to be a year of redemption for Harry and Meghan, just not the way they hoped. And it's just started. Oh, I can't wait for whatever else is coming. And I know some of what is coming. Oh, heaven on earth. Just desserts. Nini M says, M's bio on the Harry Walker site is beyond grandiose. Delusional woman. Yes, I've read it. I'd suggest you do as well. I don't know why people are waiting for the Messiah to come again when we have a Miss-Sire. And since you don't know it, don't take my word for it. Ask Megsy Baby, she'll tell you. And before we get into something meatier, and we are, something serious, I'm going to read out what Peggy Browning has to say. I don't think Harry and Meghan will ever divorce, because as long as she's married to him, she is still in the running to be queen, if ever there's an accident. Is anybody going to say pretty please? She probably daydreams of that scenario constantly. Pretty please? No, no, no. She will never allow Harry to ever escape her grip. Well, I think we need to wait and see what happens. I am not a fortune teller. I have always been at pains to say I'm not a fortune teller, and I make no predictions. And I know the tremendous possibilities in relationships like that. I witnessed it with my parents. And I can tell you something. When a man is caught up in the jaws of an opportunist whose teeth are so barracuda-like. Just look at that smile at Megsy Baby. Well, it costs enough money, so I may as well show it off. But, it's possible, and who knows? I'm not making any predictions, but I thought I'd read this out because it certainly adds a slightly new dimension to the debate, doesn't it? And the observation is a valid one. Oh, pretty please, pretty please, pretty please, can I be the Queen? Pretty please, pretty please, oh, I need to be the Queen. JB123 says, Dear Lady C, please discuss the post office debacle. And at this point, may I interject and say to all of you who are not British, we in this country are involved in the emergence of the greatest and largest miscarriage of justice that has ever been done in the history of this country to several hundred people by one of the most established elements of the establishment, and that all the political parties are involved to their detriment, and a very few people come out of this with any credit whatsoever. But the 2 or 3 who do should be commended, and I'm certainly going to draw attention to them. So to those of you who don't know what we're speaking about, I'm going to read the question, and if you have any interest in a gross miscarriage of justice, this is one of the worst you will ever hear about. It involves over 700 people, several of whom went to prison, 4 of whom made permanent solutions to their temporary problems. This being YouTube, I need to be careful what I say. Many of whom were bankrupted and their lives destroyed because of the arrogance and really irresponsibility and, quite frankly, psychopathic callousness of some of the participants at the top. A total disgrace. Even the Prime Minister has condemned it as an appalling miscarriage of justice. But I'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to read out the question. Dear Lady C, please discuss the post office debacle and obvious obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and the affront to justice as ruled by the judge with regards to the heinous treatment of its employees. Also, the petition in favour of the post office CEO returning her outrageously awarded CBE. That's the Commander of the British Empire. It's one of the grades of, one of the lower grades, but still one of the grades of honours awarded in this country for service. Please share It's Growing by the Hour. Awareness needed. Much love. I couldn't agree more. There is a petition to deprive her of her CBE, and I don't only think she should be deprived of her CBE. I think she should be deprived of that element of her pension which covers the period that she was at the post office. And I think everybody who was involved with this for the duration that they had any input throughout this scandal, their pensions should be, shall we say, altered so that it reflects their total dereliction of duty, because they knew what was going on and they were too interested in protecting their own backsides, to be blunt about it, to give people justice. And there is nothing, in my opinion, worse than people in positions of authority or power who misuse it, and they should be made to pay. Well, the Telegraph has stated that the Prime Minister strongly supports the review into revoking Paula Venel's CBE. I don't think it's enough. I think she should be stripped of it. She was awarded it after she had retired and at a time that they knew that she had overseen what is literally the most appalling large-scale injustice done in the history of this country. And she has an honor. Also, as I said, her pension needs to be looked at, and any element of it that has anything to do with the post office needs to be stripped. I think we can call it the Dame Alison Rose solution. Well, she was chief executive between 2012 and 2019 of the post office. The post office, you need to remember, was one of the most trusted and respected institutions, not only in this country, but in the world. When the Cullinan Diamond was discovered in 1908, and it was being shipped to Europe to be cut at Asher in Antwerp. Asher are famous diamond cutters. There was a whole ruse where a package was accompanied by security officers and Pilkington guards. It was a fake. They posted it via the post office. Yes, that is how trustworthy, that is the true level of trust that was placed in the post office. And that has continued until recently. Well, I don't know what world the Labour, Liberal Democrat and Tory politicians who have been involved in this scandal are living in, because anybody who has to deal with the post office knows that it has, over the years, been declining greatly, but partly starved of funds, and partly because there are now so many other services, Amazon, etc., etc. So I'm not totally blaming the post office for the fact that it struggles and everything is now very expensive to post, but its honesty, unbelievable. I am calling for the appointment of a specially convened court to deal in an expedited matter with all of the outstanding claims. This has been going on for years, for well over a decade. Several people have died. Several people have been bankrupted. Several people have lost their homes. I mean, we're speaking in the hundreds. We're not speaking about one or two. But even if we were speaking about one or two, it's too many. And not enough has been done for them to be recompensed and compensated for the tremendous injury that was done to them. And not only should they be given back what they lost, but they should be awarded damages. I don't care that it comes out of my pocket, and I would hope everybody listening who has a say in it wouldn't mind it coming out of their pockets either, and we can recoup some of that money by penalising those who were responsible by depriving them of their pensions, which are always going to be far in excess of anything that any of these poor injured sub-postmasters and postmistresses will actually ever achieve. There is a public inquiry into the scandal which is ongoing, but I don't think that's enough. And quite frankly, I am sick to my back teeth of public inquiries that either come up with a whitewash or at the end of several years after, nobody has benefited except the people who are involved with the inquiry and receiving fat amounts of money. No, it's not good enough. We need a specially convened court which can be headed up by retired judges. There are many retired judges that are absolutely on the ball. They should be roped in. This is a very special case and it needs to be dealt with in a special way. I'm going to read out something where the post office staff either knew about the system's failings and kept their mouths shut to protect their jobs and to protect the reputation of the post office, while driving people into bankruptcy and knowingly causing people who had no debt to have to sell their houses and their businesses to pay debts that the post office should have known if they didn't, were not right. Because what had really happened was that Horizon, which is a computer company that is a part of the Fujitsu group, had, I think it was £1 billion contract with the post office. And there were glitches. And they would from time to time charge people, sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses, thousands of pounds, sometimes tens of thousands of pounds, and say, oh, this money's short. What nobody has yet got to the bottom of is, were there dishonest people in the post office itself, the company, the post office, who were manipulating the system and helping themselves to that money? Because they then forced these poor postmasters and postmistresses to sign away, because if they didn't, they would go to jail. And some of them still went to jail that when they couldn't pay, even though by then there was a suspicion that something was radically wrong with the system. And I'll tell you what was wrong with the system. It was discovered very early on by a hero called Alan Bates, and I use that word very sparingly, I have to tell you, but this man is a true hero. He was one of the sub-postmasters who, I think there was a shortfall of a very small amount of money in 4 figures. But he had bought his post office for £65,000, and he refused, because he knew that he hadn't stolen the money, and he refused to sign, which they wanted him to do, saying that he admitted liability, even though he wasn't liable, and they should have known he wasn't liable. But this is how they got people, you see, because the contracts required them to sign away their rights. And anyway, he refused to sign, and he said, I'll walk away if you give me back my £65,000 that I paid for the post office. And they refused to do it. And it's cost them billions so far. It's going to cost them a whole load more money. But that's okay. Justice demands that these people be recompensed. Well, he tried to get somewhere with the Labour government. This was in 2009. And while I remember it, may I say, I think he should be rewarded with a viscountcy. He should be made Viscount Bates. Maybe they can call him Viscount Bates of the Post Office and be facetious now. But I think he should be given a viscountcy. He shouldn't be made a member of the House of Lords, although if he is, it should be with the proviso that he is not only a life peer, but he is a viscount. But I don't think you can do both. I think he should be given a viscountcy, which means far more in many ways than being a life peer. And he got in touch with the Labour Party, who were then in power, and said, you know, there's a huge problem, and the post office is charging people who run it for debts, and say that there's 5,000 missing, there's 50,000 missing, and there are obviously glitches in the computer system. Well, I tell you, whether it was a glitch or actually corruption is open to question, because he discovered that they had the ability to access each account, which they then kept on denying that they had the ability to do. He got in touch with, as I say, the Labour Party person who was in charge. Nothing happened. Then he was ignored until he joined Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance in November 2009. It's for short JFSA. And normally I don't like acronyms, but I think we can hopefully use this one. Then in 2010, there was an election. The Labour Party lost, and there was a coalition between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. And the Liberal Democrats controlled the whole of the post office system through the business system, because Sir Vince Cable was the business secretary of state, that is, which is above a minister in this country, from May 2010 to May 2015. And he was in charge, and his two underlings were, first of all, Sir Ed Davey, who is now the head of the Liberal Democrats. And prior to that, Vince Cable was the head of the Liberal Democrats. So the two heads of the Liberal Democrats have not only been involved with this, but did little or nothing when they should have been alert to the fact that something was radically wrong, that they were destroying lives were being destroyed under their watch, and they simply turned a blind eye to it. Well, in fairness to Ed Davey, after trying to blow off Mr. Bates, because there is a TV program that has kicked off all of this, called Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, which is a four-parter that ITV has been airing. And I have to say, I commend them fully. Now, those of you who know me know I'm no great fan of ITV. But in this instance, I say fabulous, because this is the sort of thing that television stations should be addressing. Well, after Mr. Bates got in touch with Ed Davey, David basically said, well, there's nothing we can do. It's not our place to interfere with the legal process. And we really can't do anything. And that was a line that was then followed as well by his successor, Joe Swinson, who was the minister from September 2012 to May 2015. And the post office throughout all of this period kept on denying that there could be a problem, even though they by then had ample evidence to suggest there was a problem. And by failing to acknowledge that there was a problem, they were derelict in their duty, and they were asleep on the watch in the most shockingly irresponsible way. And they need to pay the price because they kept on destroying lives even after they knew that this was causing tremendous suffering for hundreds of innocent people, some of whom went to prison. I mean, some of whose lives were destroyed. Their children were roundly abused because their parents were suspected of being con artists. I mean, this is a disgrace. Well, the Liberal Democrats decided, we're going to wash our hands of this. So they put Mr. Bates in touch with James Arbuthnot, who at the time was a Tory MP. Now, I used to know his brother terribly well. I actually really rather liked his brother William. And I used to occasionally see him and his wife Emma, who is a High Court judge, incidentally, at dinner at Williams. I'm not going to go into any details because we weren't friends, but meaning James and Emma and I weren't friends, but we had his brother in common and other mutual friends, and I will say they are utterly honourable and decent people. I know this for very personal reasons. They are truly people of decency and integrity, and they are motivated, both of them, by higher purposes. I know that she, being a judge, has made some decisions that people don't agree with, but my own experience of them has been that they are noble in the truest sense of the word. Well, he took up the cudgels on behalf of the sub-postmasters and mistresses who were being abused without any success to speak of. And he has recently said that he finds it disgraceful that successive governments have been giving hundreds of commissions, contracts to Horizon and or Fujitsu when they know that they were responsible for this debacle. He thinks it's a disgrace, and so do I. And he is the other person who comes out of this as a hero. And at the moment, he is a lord, and I think he should be upgraded to a hereditary baron. both he and Mr. Bates should be given honours that are not quantifiable, but that will recognise in a meaningful way that they are people of honour. And Mr. Bates's partner, who has been somewhat sidelined in all of this, I think she should be made a dame. I mean, we have an honours system. Let's give honourable people the honours. And as for the rest, it is a shocking disgrace that after nearly a decade and a half, that justice has still not been done to most of these people, and they have been kept dangling, and some of them have died, and they have all been suffering as a result of the remiss attitude of the post office seniors, who clearly did it. And if they didn't realize that there was a problem initially, and I'm not saying they would have realized that there was a problem initially, once it became apparent that there was a problem, they should have started to be alert to the fact that it was their duty to ensure that if there was a problem, it was dealt with, it was acknowledged and dealt with. But rather than do that, they lied. They kept on denying that they had access when they had access. And indeed, evidently, one of the people who pointed out to them that they had access, they then proceeded to stick his wife with a £40,000 debt. Obviously, spitefully, to get rid of him. I mean, I'm sorry. This is a shocking, shocking disgrace. And something needs to be done about it. And I said that I think the way to do it is meaningfully and quickly. Convene special courts or rush through with as much speed as is possible judgments, quashing the convictions, reinstating and giving them meaningful compensation. So that's my take on it. I hope everybody who isn't British isn't totally sick now of what I've said and bored to their back teeth. But this is such a huge scandal, I cannot tell you. And it's the sort of situation where we, the people, need to make sure that we achieve for our fellow citizens the justice that they deserve. That's what being a good citizen is all about. Barbecue says, Lady C, the palace has announced a visit to Australia by Charles and Camilla later this year. In the lead up to the visit, I hope the palace PR team, if they have a functioning PR team, well, they do. I have to tell you, I'm not particularly impressed with it, but there we go. Puts out information on practical work the royal family does. Matters such as the success of Poundry and the Prince's Trust, now called the King's Trust. And I hope the King steers clear of issues such as climate change activism, from your mouth to God's ears, but I have a feeling Charles's tongue is going to circumvent that one bit of wonderful, wonderful wisdom. Anyway, because it's one of his bugbears. And I hope the King stays clear of issues such as climate change activism, which is often seen here as unwelcome meddling in politics. Otherwise, the media will take the opportunity to dominate the narrative with derogatory commentary about Andrew. seeking to undermine Charles the monarchy by association. Disingenuous speculation about the Harkles being welcomed back to the UK and the usual calls for a republic, etc. This opportunity for great PR could be used against Charles, as happened when William and Catherine visited Jamaica. Well, William and Catherine's visit to Jamaica was derailed by Meghan and Harry and their mischief making. But I hear what you're saying, and may I suggest? Thank you. Sorry about this. Don't write to me, write to the King's private secretary and make the point. Is it going to do any good? Who knows? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. I suppose if enough Australians wrote to him, it might make a difference. Might. But Charles is firmly convinced that climate change, and he is something that he needs to be activistic about. But maybe if you make the point that it has political overtones in Australia, which will hamper the visit, maybe you will succeed. I have no great deal of hope. Deborah Masterson says, most of the racists are not white. Sounds like they have now infiltrated the UN and will collapse it instead of holding it up. The UN is past its prime anyway. What do you think, Lady C? Well, I think the UN is basically an organization that has some merit. As with all organizations, and in fact everything on earth, sometimes it functions, everybody and everything sometimes functions better than others. There is unfortunately an awful lot of anti-white racism in this world. And it is a misnomer to think that racism goes in only one direction. It goes in all directions. And I think if the UN continues at the rate it is going, well, it never does continue at the rate it is going because, all organizations evolve and all organizations react to their times. And we have been living in the West in a very inclusive times where there is the ethos of apologizing for sins you didn't commit, but that were committed centuries ago. This, I think, is simply a reflection of the ethos of the age, and I think it's already passing. I think it's going to take a good 20 or 30 years to move on to something else. And I keep on saying to my children and to my friends and to myself, if God had intended us to be angels in heaven, he wouldn't have made us human beings on earth. We are fallible. And the lesson to learn and to remember at all times is that within our fallibility, we and others will make mistakes, and it is up to each of us to ensure that we behave in such a way and encourage the growth of constructiveness and positivity over destructiveness and negativity. So, I haven't given you possibly as precise an answer as you would like, because I think the UN has merits and it also has drawbacks. And I think as some of the younger countries mature and we get rid of some of the faux victimhood that has become so prevalent in our world today, and they begin to assume responsibility for themselves and their own actions and not trying to pass the buck to everybody else, I think there will be changes, positive changes. So, I am not fooled says, my take is this: Virginia Giuffre did service Andrew and several powerful, rich older men. She was willing and was paid and was at least 17 years old. Years later, she saw an opportunity to make even more money and so accused and successfully sued Prince Andrew. The idiot. He was the biggest fish and easiest to sue successfully. I'm not going to disagree with a word of what you said. What I will say, however, is that there has been tremendous mischief making because the press is fully aware that little and nothing in these supposed revelations is new. But you know, one of the main organizations in this country that is spearheading the shock horror of it all is the Mail group, Associated Newspapers. Why are they doing that? To preserve their skin, because they are the ones, with the cooperation of a journalist of theirs called Sharon Churcher, who kicked off a whole load of all of this by getting Sharon Churcher to go to Australia and convince Virginia Giuffre that there was money for her to make and for them to make by creating mischief and by making claims, some of which, Sharon Churcher is on record as having not only denied that Virginia Giuffre is quite the saint that she is now pretending she is, but that Sharon Churcher suggested, there's an email trail of Sharon Churcher suggesting names to Virginia Giuffre, some of which she didn't even know who they were, to rope into the story because it was going to make it better. Well, they're not blaming themselves, they being the Mail, so they have to pretend that all of this is truthful when they have to know, as do I, and this goes back to the post office, when you know that an injustice is taking place, it is, in my opinion, indefensible that because you think it is in your worldly or financial or personal interest to perpetuate that injustice, and that you then whip up a frenzy and ignore your duty to yourself, your duty to your God, your duty to society, your duty to stand up for what is right and not go along with what is wrong just because it suits you. And Lynn Johansson says, my question for Virginia Giuffre is, why haven't you publicly named any of your other abusers? She has said there were multiple high-profile clients. Well, you've used the word client and you've put it in inverted commas, and you've been right to do so. They were buying something she was selling. It's as simple as that. And I do not condemn anybody who wishes to have a fair exchange, and if they wish to make that themselves, that, in my opinion, is their right. I don't agree with it. I don't think it should happen, but I certainly don't set myself up as judge and jury. Why hasn't she named anyone else? Low-hanging fruit. She went for Alan Dershowitz as well, who she thought was going to be low-hanging fruit, and he resisted. Well, a prince of the United Kingdom was always going to be low-hanging fruit. And we are going to end with Rhonda Cross-White, who says, I'm sick up to my eyebrows of listening to Miss Giuffre and the other young women moan and groan over how they were taken advantage of for the purposes of YouTube by J.E. and his friends, when they happily accepted the payment for services rendered. They took the money and went back for more, sometimes driven to his house by their parents. In 1973, I was 16 years old and recently graduated from high school. My boyfriend was 24 and we both worked. He was employed full-time and I worked part-time. At the end of summer, we moved from Texas to Washington, where I began university in the autumn. Both of our respective parents were accepting of the relationship. Now, at almost 67 years old, I am not filing lawsuits and claiming to have been abused. It took many years, but I did finally earn an MD, PhD, and a master's degree. Was I young? Most certainly. Did I know what I was doing? Absolutely. Would I do it again? I might make a few changes, but I'm not complaining. I don't believe that young women got stupider in the intervening 20 to 30 years. No, I don't think women have got more stupid in the intervening 20 to 30 years. I think what has happened is that society generally no longer has as desirable the concept of embracing your responsibilities and living up to them. I think that we now live in a world where people are given sympathy for moaning and groaning and being victims, because we are in a very sort of more accepting culture, and in some ways it's good to be sympathetic. I just think you need to be careful what you're sympathizing about and who you're sympathizing what with. Terrible English, but I think you get the point. I think there is something fundamentally destructive about the victim culture and the insanity that prevails today in certain quarters, where women who sold themselves and sold themselves out while selling themselves then have an opportunity, having betrayed their own true interests, to betray the interests of their associates so that they sell themselves a second time in as equally reprehensible morally a way, and get a reward for it. The last time they got money, this time they get sympathy and money and admiration. I have nothing against a tart with a heart, but I certainly do have no respect for women or people who, having acknowledged that they did something wrong, don't accept the blame that they deserve, but try to shift it off onto others. Because there is something far cleaner about a business transaction that you and I may regard as not desirable for us, but which is fair exchange being no bargain, and one person has something to sell, another person has something to buy, and they do it. And then, having betrayed yourself by doing that, you then spin around and betray the person to whom you sold. I'm sorry. I think there are tremendous moral issues tied up with this that we seem to have lost sight of. And morality isn't only about what you do below the waist. It's also what you do above the waist. And I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please keep the questions and comments coming in so I will know what you would like us to be speaking about. Okay? Thank you. God bless and goodbye. And if you have truly enjoyed this, please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and take good care.